Hey guys, my neck is sore today and we're going to talk about a small town in Colorado and the Safe Banking Act maybe actually happening. Potentially, yes, it could happen. So in an example of how marijuana can really kind of change a landscape for the better for now, it may have rippling effects later on, but there's a small town in Colorado. It's outside of Denver. It's called Moffat, M-O-F-F-A-T, Colorado, where it was literally like 120 people, really tiny little town that a growing operation for marijuana, a few growing operations for marijuana moved to this town. Now the excise tax that they're getting from marijuana has been insane. It's the amount of money coming into this town has now been exponential. Last year they received $400,000 in excise tax, and for a small town that's like a crazy amount of money. So they now have green in their eyes, and they're seeing in many different ways, and they're seeing how marijuana can really change everything for them, and growth has been great for them, and they're very excited. And the CEO or the founder of these operations that are growing marijuana wants to change the town name from Moffat to Kush because of this. And it's kind of funny because they're basically deciding to make their entire town a gimmick of marijuana for good reason. I understand why they would want to do this, because now they are seeing what marijuana can do for them, and if they really kind of embrace it, lean into that, they can get even more like tourism coming to the town. And especially if you're called Kush, Colorado, like people are going to want to go to this town who maybe are visiting Colorado for a few days. They're like, well, we got to check out Kush, Colorado. So this is just an example of like what marijuana is doing to some places, especially in California and in Colorado. It's really kind of changing the game for a lot of people, and the money is obscene. Then we'll turn to one of the absurdities of all of this money in marijuana, which is that lots of it is outside of the banks. They can't put it in banks because, of course, it's federally illegal to be growing marijuana, to be selling marijuana. However, state by state, it's legal, yada, yada, yada. But the banks don't want to deal with this gray area, so they're kind of staying out. The Safe Banking Act, of course, would allow them to work with banks. Banks would be able to work with dispensaries, and therefore dispensaries wouldn't have to deal with all this cash and get robbed all the time. And there are some deadly robberies happening in these dispensaries because of this. But the Safe Banking Act, one that almost everybody agrees with, is stalled in Congress for a bunch of different reasons. One of the big ones is that the Democrats want a sweeping marijuana bill to be the thing that gets passed, as opposed to small incremental marijuana bills like the Safe Banking Act. However, all of that seems to maybe potentially be changing, because news broke today saying that Schumer, the guy who really kind of has this big cannabis bill and is making a big hoopla about it and will not allow anybody near it, is having talks with Representative Dave Joyce, who's a Republican from Ohio, and they are trying to get a compromise bill happening which would allow safe banking to go through, which is a pretty Republican-heavy bill, with an expungement bill. And these two things are the most obvious parts of marijuana discussions that like everyone kind of agrees with, and the larger stuff of legalization not everyone agrees with. However, these two things are big, and there are two bills that have already been created. There's the Safe Banking Act that everyone talks about, and then there's the HOPE Act, which was a co-sponsor between AOC, the very progressive representative from New York, and Dave Joyce, the very not progressive Republican representative from Ohio. They put together the HOPE Act, which would incentivize jurisdictions to expunge records. It would give them grant money to do all the research and make huge expungements in their areas. So this would be a huge step, and it seemed like it was dead in the water for a long time. It was introduced in December and nothing's really kind of come of it. However, Schumer now is talking with him and seeming like he's open to the idea of having these two things pass before his huge legalization bill, which that has been the biggest sticking point for me with Schumer and with with Cory Booker, with other Democrat senators out there who don't want anything to pass unless it's their big thing. But if they're now finally getting to the point and realizing, wait a second, we're losing this issue, we're losing this battle because we're trying to put everything into one thing and then delaying, this is great. This is awesome news. I really, really, really hope it comes through, because this was the big thing that should happen as soon as possible. Expungements of records, because we're no longer doing these in many cities and many states. We're no longer arresting people for marijuana, so why are people still in jail for it? And the Safe Banking Act, which again has huge support. Even the banks of Montana put out an ad recently saying that they want the Safe Banking Act to go through, because they want to deal with businesses in their state. They want to deal with businesses in Montana despite them disagreeing or agreeing with the legalization of marijuana. These businesses are legitimate and they want to deal with them. They want to help them. So I'll be following this really closely to see if anything comes of it. I really, really hope it does. I think it will probably sometime this summer, maybe in the coming weeks. We'll see some expungements happen. We'll see some safe banking happen. That would be a wonderful summer for us. And that's really the big story of today. That's the big story of the summer, especially if it actually happens. It is Friday, so it's New Music Friday. There's really only one release that I'm kind of excited about, and didn't realize I would be excited about, but it's an artist named Grace Ives, who has kind of gone under the radar, at least for me. And then I put on this album that she just released today, and it blew me away. It's just very sharp, very clean pop music. It's tasteful, however, it's experimental, it's explorative. She's got a great voice that kind of stays on the top of all of these synths and bubbly things happening underneath her. It's really good stuff, highly recommend it. Grace Ives, the album is called Janky Star, which really kind of fits the sound, Janky Star. Yeah, and that's all we've got today. We'll be back next week with some more stories. We'll see you then.